Let's hear from the Cobra, Carl Froch. He's been speaking about our very own Gareth A Davies on his podcast this week, but he started by responding to our interview last week when we were speaking to Nikisa Bidarian, Jake Paul's manager.
You said, who am I? Yet you're on talkSPORT breaking down my record.
So when I think about someone like Carl Froch, who has repeatedly tried to discredit Jake Paul, and you look at his amateur career, 30-plus fights, and then I look at his opponents 10, 12, 15 fights in. I looked at an opponent in his fourth fight. Jake Paul fought Tyron Woodley in his fourth fight, a UFC champion who's been on the biggest stages, who's a certified killer in mixed martial arts, and came over to boxing with a fairly novice Jake Paul. Carl Froch fought a guy in his fourth fight after 30 amateur fights who had 55 losses and ended his career with over 100 losses.
Listen, when you turn professional, you build your career, you fight journeymen, you fight people with different styles to learn the trade. And that's your journey on the way to becoming a bona fide world champion, something fake Paul will never be. But you're not comparing apples with apples, are you? Because Jake Paul is fighting MMA fighters. He's fighting ex-MMA fighters and fighters that have never boxed. He's only fought one professional fighter, one professional boxer, and that's Tommy Fury. And he lost. So before I go, I want to talk about some so-called boxing journalists. Ariel Helwani, talking shit on his show last week. Absolute nonsense, really exposing his knowledge, his limited knowledge for the professional boxing world. And Gareth A Davies as well, talking absolute He's just happy to be there, isn't he? He's already showed his hand. He said, oh, listen, I'm a big advocate for Jake Paul and the Paul brothers and what they're doing, and I personally feel that it's great for boxing. Great for boxing. Give your head a wobble, Gareth.
Nikisa, full disclosure, I have a very good relationship with both yourself and with Jake and Logan Paul, and I get a lot of access, and I appreciate that. And I'm fully behind what Jake does in boxing. I think he's good for the sport, and I think what you guys are doing is extraordinary, and it was an amazing week last week. I think we were all seduced by wanting Mike Tyson to roll back the years and give Jake a much harder time than he did. I think the marketeering that you guys do, as you're speaking right now, is very brilliant.
How is it great for boxing what they're doing? You've showed your hand. You've said, oh, I get access to the changing rooms, and you give me interviews. And can you kiss his arse anymore by just showing that hand that you're just happy to be there? It's pathetic. It's embarrassing. Just back the fighters up. And as for saying Jake Paul could beat me, I mean, that's just ludicrous. I don't think anybody, except for Jake Paul and his fanboys, the team would even go anywhere near agreeing with that. It's just ridiculous. So Gareth, give your head a wobble, mate.
Now, the ideal situation off the back of Carl's podcast would be Carl and you to have a conversation now. But Carl's out working this evening. So what would you like to say?
Well, I'd love to hear from him later on tonight after this, because I know he's at Galal Yafai and Sonny Edwards. Carl needs to be very careful, in my view. He's become a super troll, of course. He's Froch on fighting and the Frochalongs. Quite brilliant. He's right on this end of the spectrum with his views on everything. Very dyed-in-the-wool boxing purist, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think Carl and Rachel are brilliant on the podcast together, his wife, doing their Q&As. Listen, full disclosure again, as I said, I think Jake Paul and Nikisa Bidarian are good for boxing in what they do and what they project and promote. I think Carl Froch is very good for boxing as well. I covered his entire career, as you know, and we've always got on very well. I don't mind him calling me a super clown. I won his clown poll during the week over Nikisa Bidarian and Ariel Helwani. I found it very amusing. But Carl needs to be careful. He's 48 next year. He's been 11 years away from the sport. Yes, he was a 4-time world champion. Yes, he's a Hall of Famer. He has claimed that he could beat Jake Paul with one hand tied behind his back. He's going to need both hands, because if Jake Paul calls him out and says, no, we're on, we'll do it at Wembley Stadium, more than 80,000 people, Carl, you're not going to be able to say no. And if you lose to Jake Paul And I know it sounds unthinkable, but if you lose with 14-ounce gloves in an 8 2-minute round fight and you haven't got it anymore at the age of 48, never mind the village of Gedling or Nottingham or even anywhere in this country, you will not be able to walk down the street afterwards. I've got a feeling, and it'll come down to Jake Paul rather than Carl, that Jake Paul will end up calling Carl Froch out and we will see that fight.
Do you honestly think he's going to call him out? Come on, let's be honest about
I honestly think that Carl Froch Carl has done a brilliant job of becoming a super troll and making himself really relevant in the boxing world right now. His podcast,
He's always
fantastic.
been relevant in the boxing world.
No. Don't get me wrong. He was a brilliant fighter.
Yeah.
As I said, I covered his entire career.
Of course.
I remember him as a nervous light middleweight at St George's Hall in Liverpool as an amateur covering his career. I covered his entire career in detail, on the road, Atlantic City, all over the place, the Kessler fights, through thin and thinner and thicker, and he was brilliant to be around, and it was brilliant to see him grow. He's been away for 10 years. He's become germane again. He's become salient again because of his brilliant podcast.
Yeah.
He calls everyone out. He's attacking Eddie Hearn, his old mate Eddie Hearn. He's attacking Anthony Joshua. He's attacking anyone that brings him numbers. He's a super troll. Yeah, but we love him for that, and I think he was very funny calling us out last week and myself out. But I think he's going to be in a heap of hot water if Jake Paul says, OK, Carl, let's do it. Wembley Stadium, let's beat the 80,000 record, because Carl's been away 11 years. 2014 it is, since he fought George Groves. He'd be better off fighting George Groves than Jake Paul.
What is... You're on the troll yourself now.
A little bit.
What is giving you the thought that Jake Paul would cause Carl Froch any problem whatsoever in a boxing ring?
Because Carl's been away 10 years. And he'd start to think about being away 10 years, and the nose is straightened, and the beautiful, distinguished grey hair is there now.
It's Carl Froch. He won't care about his nose.
Time waits for no one. He will care about his nose.
He won't. He's a fighter.
I'm just suggesting... Carl will probably come back at me over this and say, listen, I'll wipe the floor with Jake Paul. Keep saying it because you'll talk it into existence. I think Carl, deep down, really wants that fight with Jake Paul. And we all want to see him knock out Jake Paul. Come on, let's be honest about it. We'd love to see Carl Froch knock out Jake Paul, but he's 48 next year, not 36 when he finished his career.
Why do you want bad things for Jake Paul?
I don't want... I told Jake Paul that I wanted him to be knocked out by Mike Tyson to his face. But he wasn't able to do it. Go for a big puncher who's 10 years younger than Mike Tyson, who's going to sell it, who sold Wembley Stadium in front of 80,000 people because of his vitriol and his dislike of George Groves, which was a brilliant event and spawned all the stadium fights. I just think that Carl is calling on the universe and he's going to get his wish. Okay, happy?
Listen, this ain't my rodeo. I'll let you crack on.
Get hold of Carl. Let's get him on the phone later on.
Okay. Stick with us. You listen to Fight Night on talkSPORT.
On AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.